I put on a suit jacket today because I'm going to do something professional. Before we dive headlong into the theological fireworks of the University of Oklahoma's essay, let me be clear about why I'm here. Turning Point USA, yes, that tireless engine of outrage, is currently circling a professor who dared assign a 0 to the following submission. Naturally, the social media lynch mob is at full throttle. Righteous indignation tweets, hashtags, and maybe even perhaps a couple TikToks. And yet, despite all the histrionics, the question remains, was the grade justified? So here's a peer review from a religious scholar who specializes in angelology and modern Christianity. Not to wag a finger at the student or the professor, nor to fan political flames, but to give a sober, evidence-based assessment of the essay itself. Consider this the rational calm before the storm of partisan fury. It's a critical read-through to determine if the 0 holds water. So, let's begin with the obvious. This essay isn't so much an academic paper as a gospel revival with a keyboard. It's earnest, it's breathless, and it has the moral subtlety of a brass band in a library. The student sets out to argue with the conviction of someone who has been personally lectured by God that gender is divinely preordained, and any meddling with the sacred script is catastrophic. Quote, God made male and female and made us differently from each other on purpose and for a purpose, she writes, as if scribbling a memo from heaven. It's confident, it's pious, it's also academically bankrupt. Evidence? Citations? Engagement with scholarly debate? Nada. Zilch. 0. And yes, the professor then gave her a 0. The right-wing outrage brigade is circling, and I can feel them. The essay's centerpiece seems to be around Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, with a cameo by the Hebrew phrase ezer kenegdo. Here the student is both clever and comically off the mark. She translates it as helper equal to, which is cute, actually, like giving your dog a pair of spectacles. Technically, it's not wrong in the most superficial sense, but it's a translation that crushes nuance underfoot. The Hebrew ezer is usually God's moniker for help, powerful, active. Kenegdo means corresponding to, facing, matching, and so on. A better translation would be, based off of Strong's Hebrew dictionary, corresponding partner or supporting strength. It's about balance, collaboration, and relational symmetry, not a divine blueprint for little girls to practice embroidery while boys wrestle lions. Yet the student leaps, wings spread wide, from text to social prescription, as if Moses himself whispered a list of gender-appropriate hobbies. This is the essay's signature flourish. The prose struts and preens, a gospel revival meets TED Talk. Women naturally want to do womanly things because God created us with those womanly desires in our hearts, she says. Cue the choir. The student does not hedge. She does not analyze. She pontificates. The academic equivalent would be setting your lab reports on fire and chanting the findings out loud. There is confidence here, yes, but is there method? Not a trace from what I can see. But here is a possible methodology, I think, or rather it's a ghost of a methodology. The essay is a miracle of assertion without citation. Secondary literature? Social theory? Studies on identity formation? Nope. Student insists that gendered behavior in children is purely divine in origin and that social pressure is irrelevant. This is, to put it mildly, a spectacular omission. Contemporary psychology and sociology, which she is in a class of, underscores that human behavior is a cocktail of biology, culture, and socialization. Ignoring these insights is like bringing a knife to a gunfight, or, more precisely, bringing a catechism to a research paper fight. And then comes the exorcism. Contemporary gender theory is a lie attributed to demonic influence. Quote, here, theological conviction lapses into outright melodrama. The student is no longer analyzing, she is declaiming, shouting, performing exorcisms with sentences, pushing the lie that everyone has their own truth. sounds less like argumentation and more like the soundtrack to a particularly fiery revival meeting. The effect on an academic reader, eye twitching, a slight recoil, a grim acknowledgement that you are not in Kansas, or in this case, Oklahoma anymore. Yet, for a sliver of credit, she is actually onto something when it comes to Ezer Kenegdo. Feminist exegetes have long noted that the conventional helper translation has been exploited to suggest female subordination. In that respect, the student intuitively rejects patriarchal readings, fortunately only to pivot immediately to fixed gender tendencies, which is to say she starts promisingly, then falls off the intellectual cliff. Then there is the prose itself. Oh, the prose. If leaning into that role means I am following gender stereotypes, then I am happily to be following a stereotype that aligns with the gifts and abilities God gave me as a woman, she says. It's like watching someone fence with invisible swords, charging shadows, all the while believing the universe is applauding. The quotation marks around stereotypes signal the anticipated eye roll of the critic. But instead of analysis, the student doubles down. She's brave, she's unhinged, she's breathtakingly single-minded. It is a ferociously misfired sermon, theatrical, vigorous, but untethered from evidence. From a grading perspective, the 0 appears justified purely on the fact that no citations are present. The essay fails on almost every academic front. No citations, over-reliance on personal belief, wild polemics, unexamined assumptions. One could argue the student has enthusiasm and some exegetical insight, but enthusiasm does not a paper make. One could imagine, though, a more constructive scenario with guidance, citations, engagement with scholarly literature, and there's a lot on this subject, and careful contextualization of scripture. This piece could have evolved into something interesting. As it stands, 0 is defensible. Now, let's talk about the content, because this is where it gets fun. Boys are courage incarnate, girls are motherly compassion incarnate. How tidy, how cruelly reductive. Social science demonstrates a more complex interplay. And remember, social science class is what she's in. Gender emerges from the messy cocktail of biology, culture, and social expectation. Turning Point USA's favorite, Jordan Peterson, even admits this in his book, 12 Rules for Life. The essay's tidy dichotomy is appealing in a Sunday school sense, but grotesquely oversimplified academically. The world is never that neat. The essay also suffers from temporal dislocation. Ancient scripture is invoked to settle 21st century debates about TikTok, peer pressure, and identity. Adam and Eve are suddenly the arbiters of American gender politics. Historical consciousness, forget about it. Analysis of cultural contingency, non-existent. The result is melodrama masquerading as exegesis from a Pentecostal, or I think a Pentecostal background. Finally, there is the apocalyptic flair, and this is why I think it's Pentecostal. Satan, my specialty, is blamed for gender diversity, youth must stick to God's plan, and the essay crescendos with prayers for divine intervention. Passionate? Yes. Academically persuasive? Not so much, because there's a lot of material out there she could be drawing on, and she draws on none of it. The prose struts, preens, and roars, but argumentatively, it is skeletal, brittle, and untethered. This essay is a sermon, a manifesto, a fever dream of theological certainty. It's brilliant, it's infuriating, and 0-worthy. If it had citations, I'd have given it a B. Maybe more if it had good citations. It demonstrates flashes of insight and a daringly theatrical prose style, but ultimately, it is undone by lack of evidence, methodological rigor, and historical awareness. The professor's grade, while harsh, was justified. As a blog post, though, it is a joy to read because one can appreciate the raw, unapologetic intensity, the holy fury in prose form, and the fact that the student really, truly believes in every word she types.